All right. Well, vaYiqra, chapter 23, verse 21. This week we begin with vaYiqra, chapter 23, verse 21. So I'm there. My Yahweh over the two lambs, the Cohen are holy to Yahweh. All right. So then we went over all the stuff that the sages said about that last week, if you recall. So we're going to start now with 21, which very literal translation is, and call out you all, because it's you in plural, in self-same the day, the this, convocation holy, he will be to you, or it will be to you. All work service, not you shall make they, statute eternal in all dwellings your, to generations you all, because again, you is in plural. Okay, so we have ukeratem. Anyone who speaks modern Hebrew is going to say, this is how that word would have been pronounced back in those days. But anyway, it's from the root kara, which is to cry out. It's the cry of an animal. It's the cry of a person. It doesn't necessarily even have to be words. It can be a loud groan, something like that. But it's the idea of to say something with real passion. That's truly the meaning behind that original root word. So we've got that idea going. And then it says be'edzem, which is in, we would say self-same or just same. Maybe you don't really have to say self-same. But then if we don't say that in that same day, because that's our next word is day, then that can be confusing in English. So you see a lot of people write the word self-same. And then it's the next word ha-yom, so the day. So it's in self same the day. So it's in the same day. Then we have hazeh, which means the idea of calling an assembly. That's why we use the kara, that crying out with a passion. Well, or perhaps loud voice, right? So yeah, it's going to have to be pretty loud if you're going to let everybody know that it's time to get together, right? And then it says, so this gathering, the next word is Kodesh. So this is a holy gathering. This isn't just we're going to get together and turn the tube on and watch some sports and eat some snacks. No, this is a holy assembly. And then it says, yeah, it will be. So it's going to be a holy assembly. Lachem, lachem, yeah, it is chem. To you, not bread. It's it will be to you a holy assembly. This is kol. Now that's the word in Hebrew for all, everything, totalitarian, not totalitarian, totality. So all of the work of an artisan, it's work that you get paid for. It's your job. But it goes on next and says avodah. You remember what happens? Now this is using both words together, and sometimes we only use one word, and sometimes we get two words, and that does not change anything. It's just the further you go into something that's written, the less, because I can say, in the beginning, and most of you can finish the whole sentence, right? That's remez in Hebrew, and it is used extensively in the biblical text, which is why they don't always say everything, they don't give the whole phrase every time. So this is labor, this is service. So you have work and service. You remember how that panned out earlier? I don't remember if that's last week or the one before. This is lo ta'asu. So you're not going to do it. And then the ta'asu is shall. This is another word for labor, is properly to labor, to work about anything, to make, to produce, to manufacture, to fabricate, right? So you shall not do this thing. I saw a line there. Then it says hukat, which is the word for statute. It's a law. It's something that an ordinance is something that's written down and you must obey. Then it says olam. Well, that's the Hebrew word for eternity. So it's an eternal statute. It goes on forever. There will never be a time when it goes away. So even if you're Jewish and waiting on Mashiach to come, when he gets here, we're still going to be following this law. And if you're Jewish and you believe that Yeshua has come, well, that didn't change anything about whether we're supposed to follow the law or not, right? And so if you believe that you no longer have to follow the law, you're not following the God of Israel. You're following a false God. Just saying. All right, and then it says bechol, so that's kol. The sound changes because what's called a bait, you can think of it as the letter B, is added to the beginning of the word. So we go from just saying kol by itself to now bechol, but it's the same word. So it's in or with totality here. Mo shevotechem. Well, those are your dwellings. That's your house where you live. That's your dwelling can even be, of course, a tent. If you live in a tent, it can be a cardboard box or whatever wherever you live. That's your dwelling. But if you're not at your home and you're out dwelling with some friends of yours, even if it's just for a week, that's your dwelling place while you're there. Sometimes you stay in a motel for a week or two. That in that moment is your dwelling place. It's a temporary dwelling place, but it is a dwelling place. And so when you go to a holy assembly and everybody gets together in that moment, though it may not last but an hour, 2 or 3, that's where you're dwelling in that moment. So the fact that it says dwelling does not limit it to the house that you live in. And it's certainly not limited to just a short period of time where you gathered, where you're hanging out somewhere else. I mean, you could be at a football stadium watching the game. You're dwelling at the football stadium for that short amount of time. So it's not particularly a set place. So the last word is ledorotehem. Well, that's 2 generations, you all, and not as in y'all, like a Texan, but it's you in plural. So it's speaking to a group of people, right? So what's my translation? Well, here it is. Because again, well, I say again, I don't remember if I said this. We stopped in the middle of the sentence when I first stopped. I backed up to 20. Well, that was not the end of the sentence. This is another piece of that same sentence. So think about what it just said, and then the sentence goes on. And shall proclaim a Mikra Kodesh. You will proclaim a holy meeting to you, or should we say to all the children of God. That's the you, because remember it's you in plural. So to all the children of God is the to you. In this same day that you shall do none of your melachet avodah, you will do none of your occupational work. A chukat, a statue forever in all your dwellings to every generation. This sentence would make no sense to anyone if we didn't know it was part of the previous English verse. As already stated, without the knowledge of all the children of Israel would have to proclaim the holy meeting. Now, I'm starting to remember what we were talking about last week, but it seemed like there's something I wanted to point out here. So you proclaim that this is a holy meeting to all of the children of God in that same day that you're making that proclamation, that you would, Melechet Avodah. Remember, there was some sages said, well, see, when it says Melechet Avodah, that's covers every kind of work. And other times when it says Melechet by itself, well, that just means the really hard work. And when it says Avodah, that's easy work. No, that is not right. You say Melechet Avodah when you want to just say the whole phrase, and then, from that point on, you can just call it Melechet, or you can say Avodah. You don't have to say both words. I've already gone over that. Hopefully you remember that little rule. Okay, so, all right, now we're at verse 22. This is, as usual, a straightforward thing here. Well, long-winded. That's very literal English, but it's long-winded. It says, and in reap your harvest land your, not you shall completely corner. You shall be poor and foreigner. Cuts, it's to cut off. It's used to cut down grain, wheat, whatever, of a field, to reap a harvest. So let's say you have an apple orchard. You're not going to cut down your apple trees, right? So you got to pick the apples. If it's a grapevines, you got to pull the grapes off, or however that, I don't know how it's done. I think they cut off the bundles or something like that. So whatever it is that you're reaping, this is not limiting this to cutting down a field. This is whatever is being reaped. So if you are a person who has a 9-to-5 job and your harvest is your paycheck, well, you can see why it's so important to so many Jews to not just give the 10% of your gain to God, as is under another law, but it's also to give offerings to the poor, because what are you going to do? Cut the corners of your check off and leave that for poor people? No, that's why it's so important to give to the less fortunate. That's why it's such a big thing in Judaism, is because of this law, because it's not limited to an actual field. You can't say, well, I don't have to worry about that because I'm not a farmer. That's not how this works. Then it says et, which is just kind of like putting an arrow. It points to something. It has no actual meaning. Ketzir, which is harvest. So you're reaping your harvest. And again, that can be absolutely anything. Your paycheck, to a wheat field, to an apple orchard. None of that matters. Then it says aretzechem, and that's in your land, because that's eretz, land. It's that word is used mostly, almost probably more than 90% of the time. That should always be translated as land. There are times when it's translated as earth, and it should never be translated as earth. There are times when it's translated as dirt, which is perfectly fine, but should be rare. And the only time you really should do that is according to the context. But the word just, oh, dadgummit. And my monitor is doing all kinds of really weird things here. Okay, so it's land. This is lo techalet, which is you will not completely cut. You want it to be a problem. No, that is not how biblical Hebrew works. You're supposed to leave something for the less fortunate. You can't look at your paycheck as wholly yours except for that 10% that you give to God. No, part of that paycheck is to be left or given, in this case, to the poor. I was looking to see if there was anything in the Jacinius that would indicate that it was used in any other way. Nothing I can see here that would help me. So our next word is vaYiqra. So we've already had, this is the word for reaping. So in reap you, or with reap, the stuff that you've cut away for the poor. Veleket. Now this is the gleanings, because if you're in a field and you've gone to reap it, there are parts of that are going to fall on the ground, and you're being told right here that you're not allowed to pick it up. Or you've taken all the apples, you think you've got all the apples off of the apple trees in your orchard, then you realize, oh my goodness, there's 10% of those apples are still up there. Great. Still, and the day later, you got all this wheat sticking back up in it. You have to leave that there for the poor people. So what is the gleaning that might be left over in your paycheck? Maybe you got a bonus. Maybe you got in some way, somehow you've got, some kind of extra. Would I go as far as to say that every bonus and any tip or whatever should be given to the poor? You can live that way if you want to, but I don't think that's the point. The point here is that you've done your job, and you've got to walk away. You can't go back and get it. This is more the idea of you can't give something to the poor and then go back to them and say, hey, can I have a little bit of that back? I don't quite have enough to get by this week. Don't let yourself get caught doing that, because that's closer to what this is saying anyway. This is ket zecha, so of your harvest. This is lo telaket, you shall, so not you will glean. You won't cut down that gleaning. Then it says le ani, so it's to the poor. Ve lager, and to the foreigner. You notice in the Septuagint that they use the word prosalutos, which, and there are people that argue that that's not correct. I argue that it is. It is the one Greek word that truly gets the idea of what a ger in Hebrew is, what that word means. Prosalutos is truly the right word for that. Then we have ta'azov, well, biblically, the way the word ger is used today, not so much, but the way it was in the biblical period, absolutely. Anyway, ta'azov, you're going to leave it there. It's used of, like you have a bundle of something and you tie a rope around it, to hold it all together. It would be to loosen that, to let it go, to walk away, to forsake. It's all of those ideas, but it's saying here, you shall leave it. We have otam, which the am at the end means them, but this is et, so it has no meaning. It's pointing, and then it says them. Then it says, Ani Yahweh Elohechem. I am Yahweh, your God. Kind of makes it ominous when he says that, don't you think? So here's our translation. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not cut the edges of your field which you reap, and you shall not gather the gleanings of your harvest, that's the leftovers, the things you miss, You shall leave them for the poor and proselytes. I am Yahweh your God. Before I was going to read something from Onkelos, but before I do that, I do want to point out one thing. God doesn't tell you how much of the corner to leave. The amount of charitable contribution that you're making here, because that's what you're doing. You're leaving the corners, you're leaving the leftovers, the missed parts. That's you being charitable to the poor. And the amount is not specified. And I know that the sages went in and tried to make that specific. OMG. God did not make that specific. That is up to you. All right. Onkelos's vaYiqra by Drauzina Wagner says the following. He, speaking of the writer of Onkelos, is consistent in recognizing that biblical Hebrew often indiscriminately mixes tenses, genders, and plural and singular, and he never utilizes these apparent grammatical discrepancies for exegetical purposes. However, the use of tense, gender, plural, and singular was not indiscriminate. Umberto Casuto, a professor at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, this is me talking, identified many, if not most, of the grammar rules utilized in the Torah, and no doubt most of the Tanakh, if not all of it, through his research in Mesopotamian writing styles and grammar, which, as it turns out, were utilized in the Bible. I would take it further and say that these same writing styles and grammar rules were utilized even in the New Testament letters. Now, the word poor, even Ezra wrote that this command had already been given in chapter 19, verse 10. He wrote that the reason for the repeat is that it is good to remind people. You guys already know what the reason is, right? Association. It's repeated because it has an association to the subject at hand. That's a hard and fast grammar rule identified by Casuto. Okay, we can compare what we just read to 19:10, and you shall not glean your vineyard, and that which has fallen from your vineyard you shall not glean. The gleanings are for the poor and proselyte, thus you shall leave them, speaking of the gleaning, and then it says, I am Yahweh your God. Again, the lack of knowledge of biblical Hebrew grammar shows itself here in this verse, or in these commentaries. The reason for the repeating of this command is by rule because of association in chapter 19, to be specific. Okay. So we get to verse 23, and it says, Vayedaber Yahweh el Moshe lemor. You guys already know those words, right? Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, so what's happening here? Something's happening. And I forgot to uncover my little piece of paper here. The subject is not changing. Oh, smacker. Oh, smack that thing hard. It's, what was the word I used? A topic. And it's not even really right to say that, because topic and subject are literally have the same meaning. But what I do is the bigger picture we're calling the subject, and the bulleted points, where you're kind of getting off the subject, but it has something to do with the subject, we're calling that topic. Hopefully you guys are following that. Okay, so we have a new topic here, or we could have a new subject if we wind up completely changing gears, which we're not going to. But Generally speaking, when you look at the Hebrew Bible, not the English, but the Hebrew Bible, the chapters get broken up differently. It's because they broke them up where the subject actually changed and not just the topic. Here we're and saying that Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying that could literally start a brand new subject, and often does. But it will in the Torah anyway, because God's giving the law, so that does happen a lot, and you'll see that generally as the beginning of a new chapter. We are not going to a new chapter, rightly so, because this is just a new topic. I'm just going to skip that one altogether. Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, or Moshe saying. So we're going to jump to 24. Speak to children Yisrael to say, in new moon, the 7th, in 2 new moon, he will be to you Shabbaton, remembrance, noise, convocation, holy. And remember, this whole chapter is about the set apart days of God, and these were set apart days. But we're switching over to something different than previous, although it's the same subject. So daber is to speak. It's the setting in a row, ranging in order, specific. This is making them understand. This is getting very specific words that like a, what do you call that? The thing that guys always throw away that women read, the directions. This is the word, really for directions. And then it says El, which is to, T-O, speak to, give directions to, B'nai Yisrael, to the children of Israel. Maybe I should say here, when this law was being given in that moment, these people did not live in Israel. They were not in Israel. They had a good 40 years to go before they would even see Israel begin to enter into the land. You realize that? How are they the children of Israel before all that happened? Well, there was this guy, and he entered into a covenant with God, and God changed his name. You guys know who I'm talking about? Anybody answer that question? So they call the children of Yisrael because these children are entering into the covenant with God. And so when we speak of the children of Yisrael, we are not talking about people who are born, raised, and live in Israel. We're talking about the children of God who enter into his covenant, like Abraham did, who wasn't in Israel. Like all of the people here called the children of Israel who had never been in Israel are being called. That's who the children of Yisrael are. They're the ones who receive God's covenant and live accordingly. Okay, this is Lemor. So now we're going from the instruction manual that the husband throws away to the explanation the wife has to give. The primary idea of this word is to shed light on this subject, to explain it, to make you understand those instructions. By Chodesh, not Kodesh, Chodesh, the sound alike almost sounds an awful lot alike. It's not really a sound alike, but an awful lot alike. Anyway, this is a new moon. So in the new moon, what we would call here in America the new month, the beginning of the month is the new moon. Ha-Shevi'i. So in the 7th month is how your translations are generally going to say it. I always translate it new moon because it's literally the moon itself being spoken of here. Then it says Be'echad, which literally means in one, the number 1. Or on the first, you could say in the first day or on the first day, that would be acceptable. On La Chodesh, on the first new moon. So it's the first day of the first new moon. Then it says, yeah, it will be, or it will come to pass, is the way it gets translated a lot. Lachem, to you, that first day of that seventh new moon will be to you Shabbaton. It will be Sabbath in plural. So you're going to have several Sabbaths on that same day. You could, if the day began, well, kind of. If the day began at the end of the day before the Shabbat, you'd have two Sabbath days in a row. No, you guys know why it's plural, right? Because it's eternal. Then it says zichron. It's a memory. It's to remember. It's to have a memorial service. It's to remember something. Well, what do you mean we're going to remember something that was, obviously it was done in the past, but how are they going to remember the things that are being spoken of here? Some of those things hadn't taken place yet. Well, they will. It's a memorial. It's a remembrance, teruah, of noise. It's a noisy remembrance, or it's a remembrance of noise. It's one or the other. Properly, this word is a tumult. It's a loud noise. It's a joyful noise, rejoicing, joyful acclamation with which the people receive the king, a warlike cry for battle, the sound of a trumpet, of a feast announced and sacrifices offered with the sounds of the trumpet, which is why this generally becomes known as the Feast of Trumpets. It's not really, it's not using the word shofar. It's using the word teruah, which is noise. So it's the Feast of Noise. Mikra, so there's your word for, it's the calling together, the assembling together of the people. Kodesh, it's a holy assembly. So our translation, speak to the Bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel, saying, in the seventh new moon, on the first day of that new moon, will be to you Sabbaths. Sabbath in plural, Sabbaths. A memorial of noise, a holy meeting. Sounds exciting to me. Shabbatot, or Sabbath in plural, because it's forever. Onkelos's vaYiqra by Drauzina Wagner stated the following. Nowhere in the Bible is the first day of the seventh month referred to as the new year, nor is there any mention of the sounding of a shofar, that's that trumpet, a ram's horn, on this day. Scripture calls this day Yom Teruah, the day of, they said, sounding. I would say noise. And then they bring up Numbers 29:1, or Zichron Teruah, the memorial through the sounding. So they're saying Yom Teruah, they say the day of sounding, or in Numbers 29:1, it's called the memorial of sounding. The memorial through the sounding. The holiday did not acquire the name Rosh Hashanah, New Year, until the post-biblical Second Temple period, because the Bible does not indicate that the first day of the seventh month is the beginning of the year or the date of the creation of the world. even in the Talmudic period, some sages were still debating whether the world was created on that date. I have to add that. They didn't say that. Nisan is the beginning of spring, and Tishrei is the onset of fall. Ancient nations also began their new year. Consensus among Jews ultimately was that the first of Tishrei was the new year, but that it was the sixth day of creation, the day in which humans were created. I don't even know why I added that. That's so nonsensical. It's not even worth talking about. But what they are pointing out is this idea of calling this the Feast of Trumpets, or calling this Rosh Hashanah. That's none of that's biblical. Literally has nothing to do with the Bible. It's man-made nonsense. Okay, and my timer looked funny to me there. Okay, so now we're looking at verse 25. All work service, not you shall make they, and make come you, which is and bring, and you bring burnt offerings to Yahweh. So we start off with kol, which is totality. Melechet, that's your word for the work and your job, the thing that you do. Then that's followed by avodah, which is service. You put the two together, and it's basically telling you whatever you do for a living, whether you're a servant or you have your own company, or if you work for someone else's company, you're, biblically speaking, a servant. If you work for yourself, you're not my wife laughed and said you're a slave. Yeah, because anyone who thinks that working for yourself is going to give you a lot of time off really has no idea what they're talking about. Okay, so this is you're not doing any work. It says lo ta'asu. You're not going to do it. You're not going to lift a finger to do anything that you do as far as work goes and what you call service. You can't split them up. They're essentially the same thing. VaYiqra rabtem, and it's like putting a rope around a cow or a horse, and you pull a horse or the cow to get it somewhere to bring. So it's the idea of you're making this happen. You're causing this thing to happen. So you're going to bring something. It says ishet, a burnt offering. You are going to bring a burnt offering for this holiday. La Yahweh, to God Almighty. Okay, so my translation: you shall not do any of your occupational labor, and you will bring your fire offerings to Yahweh. So once again, Jewish Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch, June 20th, 1808 through December 31st, 1888, compared the Hebrew word melacha to malach, both of which come from the same root, la'ach, which means to send a messenger. He went on to argue that since malach was connected to the idea of messenger from God, in other words, messengers from heaven, as opposed to humans, and thus this word was used to indicate a higher form of labor than that of eved, which is where we get avodah, which speaks of a slave, which he connected to menial labor. That's where I was talking about earlier, where they took the one word and said, well, that's hard labor, and the other one is this easy labor, as if a servant would have the easier job. Anyway, yeah, now we hit verse 26, and it says, "Vayedaber Yahweh el Moshe lemor." So now we've got another what I use topic, and Yahweh said to Moshe. So something is changing. So we have very literal in English. Indeed, in 10th to new moon, the 7th, the this day, the covering, he convocation holy, he will be, or it will be, to you, and occupy your souls, and make, let's just say, bring burnt offering to Yahweh. So it says, indeed, surely, truly, altogether, as certainly, there's all kinds of words you could use for that. Indeed is go to. So that's in the 10th. They've added the bait to Asor. In the 10th, Chodesh, so in the 10th new moon. Moved on from that one. Now we're talking about something changed. It says, so you in the 10th, we have in the 10th month, the 7th, the yo, so on the 7th day, I keep what's the word which is used for the wiping away of sin? Remitting. To get this idea that it's that what you've done is why as the east is the west. But the more modern word, kippah, is your biblical word. This is from kapar, which kippah and kapar is the same thing. They're a covering. So if you lay down on your bed and pull the blanket or a sheet over you, that is your kippah. That's your covering. If you walk out on your front porch and it has, something overhanging that front porch, keeping the sun off of you, that's a kippah. If you walk under your tree and it's keeping you nice and shaded, that's a kippah. It's a covering. And that's what this word means. It's not talking about the remission of sin. It's not talking about atonements as we think of in the Western world today. It's not redemption, it's covering. Very important that we understand what's going on. It's covering. Who next? So it is the covering. Then it goes on to I think who goes to the next word. Hu mikra kodesh. Yeah, so it is a holy convocation. No, it does go earlier. I didn't realize that it was going to be followed by Yiyah. It is saying that it is a covering. And then we switch up and go Mikra, Kodesh, Yiyah. So it will be a holy assembly. Then it says, Lachem, to you. Ve'initem. This is important. This is really important. This is to occupy yourself. It says, so labor upon anything, to exercise oneself in any. That gives you the idea that you can work after it just told you couldn't work, right? But the image behind this word is still to bring it to cultivation. When they're saying that you're supposed to do this to yourself, what is being said? This is introspection. This is the day that we're going to look inside and ask ourselves, have I done all that I was supposed to do? Have I done everything I set out to do? Where have I been successful? Where have I failed? And they use words like to oppress, to depress, to afflict. You see a lot of, to be afflicted and all that. No, this is okay. Then et nafshotehem, your souls. Does that make it real clear? Your soul, the part of you that lives on after you die, the part of you that actually is you, this human body that you can see when you're, looking at me right this moment, that part's going to die. That part's going to become worm food, right? As the saying goes. I don't think it may partially true that you're worm food, but it's actually not the worms that eat you up so much as it's other kinds of beetles and bugs and stuff like that. Okay, this is vaYiqra ravtem, and you will bring on this day that you're really looking inside and taking an honest look at yourself. You will bring ishet. You'll bring a burnt offering la Yahweh to God. So here's my translation. Indeed, in the 10th day of the 7th new moon is a day of coverings. This entire day will be a holy meeting, and you will reflect on your inner self and bring a fiery offering to Yahweh. And remember what happens to the word esh when you speak of human beings? Think about this. You're being told that this day is the day that you're looking inward. You're looking at your soul and all that kind of stuff. So this is all about you. And it uses the word esh. That means passion. This is the day that you're supposed to bring passion to your God. Does that mean you're not supposed to bring a fiery offering? No. The offering comes with it, obviously. Just because I can add that idea of your inner passion to God does not mean you get out of the bringing the actual offering. By the way, I meant to say it a while ago, but this offering, it's a barbecue. You're going to get some meat, you're going to throw it on the barbecue, and you're going to cook it up on this day. And that's what we're talking about here when we say a fire offering or a burnt offering. We're talking about a barbecue. Now, the word ach, which I used for indeed in English, Rashi wrote that the word ach meant restriction and said that this meant that those who do not truly repent on this day would not be forgiven for their sins. Rashbam seemed to see the word ach as meaning exclusion or restriction as well, but he made the connection to labor in that he seemed to believe that the inclusion of this word somehow meant that no work of any kind could be done. No. This is making stuff up, folks. They just dragging that out of thin air somewhere less pleasant. I'm not really sure where they're getting it, but it has nothing to do with the Bible. Idea that you not somehow doing this introspection properly is somehow going to get you not forgiven is ludicrous. That's a modern idea. You know, if you go down that road, nobody will ever be good enough for God except the rich people who give enough money to the rabbi or the pastor. Just saying, just throwing that out there. I do not have a 9 verse 28, so we will pick up with the verse 28 next week. Shalom, shalom, everyone.
בעברית, יברך יהוה ואיש מרעך, יאר יהוה פניו אליך ויהונך, יישא יהוה פניו אליך וישם לך shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.